I think this is a good way to start. I think it's good to that we all start thinking about sounds. And there is a sound concept that I think is very crucial here that we should really delve a little bit into, which is the idea of soundscape. This is a little bit, it's very overused right now. I think, a lot of people don't really understand where it comes from or originates from. And I think it's good that we jump into it so that we start, taking it apart. The first time the idea of soundscape was mentioned was actually in an environment of cities paper that was basically made, for city planning in MIT in 1967. It was written by Michael Frank Southworth, and he basically wrote, about how sound affects the way that cities are built and how sound should always be, thought of as an integral part of city planning. Well, this idea didn't really have a lot of impact until in 1973, a group of Canadian researchers, actually in urbanism in Simon Fraser University, started thinking that the sound of Vancouver was changing really rapidly, and that they needed to try to preserve, the soundscapes of Vancouver, because basically the city was undergoing a very rapid and disorganized form of development. So these people thought, that they really needed to record and preserve, the soundscape of the city. So they started going in field and producing field recordings of things that they thought, should be preserved, should be kept. And they started doing this exercise in 73, and then they did a second iteration of the same exercise in 96. And basically the term, soundscape, really, really started there. So it comes from the background of architecture, basically, and urban planning. So we have to think, that when we go into the more investigative, aspect of sound, we are always thinking, about sound as part of the built environment and architecture, but also as part of memory, because this form of exercises that are happening in sounds, that where soundscape comes from, are forms of memorialization. It's like this form of immaterial memorialization when suddenly these technologies are available that allow us to capture. So it's basically what these recordists are doing is similar to what the photographer Adjet was doing in pre-Haussmannization Paris, right? This, for those of you that may not be familiar, Edouard Adjet, documented extensively the cities of the streets of Paris that were going to be razed down by the Haussmannization project. And in doing so, created an invaluable document of Paris that was never to be again. The same sort of exercise happened in a more sound-driven way with the Vancouver soundscapes. And if you look at this really extremely excruciatingly long soundscape, there's over 2 hours of recordings. You will hear things that are more musical, things that are more documentary. And this is what I showed you is one of the most documentary parts of it, which is basically, it would be in a part of Vancouver, which is North Vancouver, where there's a Squamish Nation Reserve. That was, during this time, it was very rapidly engulfed in by the urban sprawl. So if you went there today, it would sound very, very different. And actually, in the last few years, the transformation has exacerbated. So this is the practice of listening, of sound. I think a good exercise, for doing sound is, of course, always listening and imagining. When I go to places and I have to film, a location where some action is going to happen, and I don't really know what the action is going to happen, and I have access to the location before, I always go with maybe with my cell phone or with a notepad, and I write the things that I hear, and I wonder what kind of sounds convey the space of a location. Somebody who does this very, very well as well in cinema is Denis Coté. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he always goes to spaces as well. He listens, and you can see it in his films. There's some sounds, that really convey a lot of space. So, for instance, if you're shooting a scene in a public bathroom, to say something, the sound of the hand drive could be like a very potent, ominous sort of driving force behind the narrative. So it's important to the filmmaker is, I cannot pronounce his name because yeah, but the Nicote, but he's very very good. So I really recommend to check his work out, of course, and I think to start thinking about what elements of sound are important to your pieces, what elements are, if you are doing, I think of course there's some that I know from some of your projects that some of them are like very fully sound driven, others may benefit from thinking a little bit about sound, like what happens, for instance, if you're doing a piece that happens mostly in your computer and you're working with a lot of screen captures and video grabs. What space are we in as spectators? Are we in the space of the computer, or are we in the room where the person is interacting with the computer? How do we convey that? Do we convey that by hearing the typing, by hearing the clicking noises? Or are we just in a space where the clicking and the sound and the typing don't exist, and basically we're just hearing the interaction that is hovering through the screen? So I think this kind of very subtle, sound design ideas can really transform, the way a piece feels, the way a piece flows. And I think let's keep them in mind.